I can't tell you how many times I've gone to customers and say, we're going to ingest your data into a data warehouse and then we're going to clean it. It's clean. I always said, I'll bet you $100 right now I'm going to find problems with it. I always won that bet. Oh, that's going way back. I've been in it 40 years, and I started when I was 18. In high school was my first experience with computers, and I fell in love with programming right away on there. I had a great teacher. I always remember him, and him going to bat for me when somebody had told me the year before about computers and the idea you can put in this code and you can make the computer do whatever you want, and I was fascinated by that. Unfortunately, I didn't realize that you had to have certain prerequisites for that, a certain level of math. And I didn't have that. Mr. Rogers went and talked to my teacher, I think he was my algebra teacher, and he said, yeah, James, he'd be fine, he'll do well. And Mr. Rogers then allowed me to go in the class. I started, it was Apple II Plus were the big machines. Mr. Rogers, through the way he taught, made it fun and enjoyable. And then that's when I said, I wanted to do this permanently and I want to start right away. And so that's why I decided to go to that technical school. And you learned, I think, 6 or 7 different computer languages. One of them being COBOL, and one of my first jobs was a COBOL programmer. And that's how I got started. I was involved since the late 80s in fantasy football. And we used software that was pretty poor to help manage the leagues and keep track of everything. From there, I said, well, I'm a programmer, so, and at the time I was using Visual Basic, so I said, I'm gonna write a program that will help me as a commissioner track everything, but also help me with the picks based on who's been picked and who's available in there. So I wrote this software for that, and I did well in the league, and I thought, well, maybe other people would be interested. Put a little ad in the fantasy football magazine, figuring maybe I'll sell a dozen or so, and I sold like 100 of them. That same idea lasted for about 12 years. We'd sit down and copy the disk, everything was attributed that way, and mail it to people, so we'd have this line of creating the manuals for it and the disk and shipping it and labeling it and all that. And then when the internet came around, I said this would be a great platform for my software. So I rewrote the software to work on the internet, and that became the future of doing all the software on and running your leagues on the internet instead of through disks. That's where I became a DBA, because the software needed to handle real-time scoring, do it every 10 minutes, every 5 minutes to every few seconds. So I had to become really good at tuning everything. If anything went wrong, people would just flood you with emails complaining, like, I can't get to my stats and all that. And anyways, I wound up doing that full-time for about a dozen years. And before I eventually sold the company and went back to the workforce as a DBA. And then that eventually led me to be an architect, and then got involved with Microsoft. I still remember why I started it. I was a consultant. I went to a customer. They had some problem, and it took me a few weeks to figure out how to solve the problem. And a few months later, I'm in another client, and they had the same problem, and I couldn't remember how I solved it. So I said, you know what, I need to document this. So the next time a problem came up, I'd put it in the blog about how I solved this problem, sort of in my own personal Google, so I can always look back and remember it. Everybody learns a little differently, and things stick in your brain a little differently. If I want to learn a topic, I would read a bunch of blogs about it, and then they didn't explain it in the way that made it easy for me to understand. So I would summarize what they said and put it in a way that made sense to me. And that's when I found a lot of other people, even within Microsoft, would come up to me and say, well, I'm glad you wrote about that. I didn't quite understand what that product or what that feature was, and you made it very easy to make sense of it. Impetus for writing that book were data mesh. This was about 4 years ago. It came out as this hype, a lot of hype about the data mesh. And when I read the hype, having 40 years of experience in there, I said, we've gone through this before. We've seen these hype cycles with these new approaches, new architectures come out there. And there was so much hype, but nobody was talking about the trade-offs. You can go down this path, but you have to be aware of things that won't work as well, or maybe it's going to take a lot longer to build a solution in this data mesh architecture, or maybe you're going to have other issues with trying to implement it because it requires a lot of change, and people don't like change in there. So when I read about it and everybody was talking about the benefits, I said, nobody's talking about the trade-offs. And in the end, I made the book also not about products, so it's lasts for a long time, hopefully, because a lot of the concepts in the book have been around for 20, 30 years and will continue to be around. No matter what happens with technology, some of these basic concepts are going to apply forever. Here's the problem we have is people are asking the same question, but getting different answers. And it turned out that what I call spread marks, they were doing reporting by sending out Excel files and emailing them around. And so you had this crazy environment of all these Excel spreadsheets that were giving inaccurate answers in there. So I came in to build a solution and centralize the data and have one place they can go, a single source of the truth. People were using different formulas in these Excel spreadsheets and they were changing them to make their particular organization look better. And the really scary thing was they were reporting those numbers to Wall Street, and so they weren't really accurate numbers on that, and they could have got a lot of trouble for that. But they were the right numbers. They just didn't like them because they didn't look as good in there. To me, it's always data quality on that. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to customers and say, we're going to ingest your data into a data warehouse and then we're going to clean it. It's clean. And I always said, I'll bet you $100 right now I'm going to find problems with it. I always won that bet because they pull in data and birth dates, how can they be wrong? Well, turns out you have birth dates in the future, or people are 200 years old. People had to put a birth date in there, so they would just make up stuff. That's a data quality issue. Quality is mastering the data. I can pull in data of, say, customers from all across these different systems, and customers may be in different systems on there for buying the products, and you pull them all in, and I want to know how many sales from this one customer. Well, I can just aggregate them all if the person's name is the same. But one system they may have used their middle name, one they used junior or senior, one they misspelled. So if I pull this all in and I give somebody a report and the first thing they do is, why is this person listed multiple times? Oh, they misspelled their name. Well, now you lost the trust in the end user. They're like, well, you gave me something that's not even right. So you have to go and master it. And that requires a lot of coding or buying a third-party product to create these golden records. And that's where a lot of customers are not educated enough to understand the possible problems they're going to have. So you need to put in that project plan a lot of time on cleaning the data. I've seen a handful of times in my career where people had overdone it with requirements, where they spend months and months gathering the requirements instead of trying to build the solution earlier in the process. The technology is such a way now that you can very easily do proof of concepts very quickly on there. And I always say it's important to get the end user involved early in building a solution, so you're working together as a team and you're not just building something and giving it to them and then they see there's a problem and they complain. But if you get them early in the process, they feel like you're working together. It's amazing sometimes with even a simple data set that you can take to get a lot of value out of that. They didn't have a clear idea of what people thought of their products on that. So I said, why don't you use some of the social media data? And because they were buying this data from third parties and it was very expensive. And I go, you don't need all that. Just pull it from the social media. People are very open and honest in the platforms. Within just a couple of weeks, they were able to pull all this data and track the sentiment of all that and quickly see what products that they were selling on their website were popular, which ones were not. And a lot of these little tweaks were just based on that feedback that instantly resulted in a large increase in sales. So there's a lot of customers who say, we don't think we're going to need real time, and so they build a solution that can't handle real time, only to find out 6 months, a year later that, oh, actually real time can help us. I always remember one client, a retail company, and they wanted to use Facebook where people were posting, and Twitter where people were posting comments about the dressing rooms in there, and they ingested that in a batch format to see what people thought. Then they decided, we're going to use a test case of one of our stores and we're going to adjust the dressing rooms. And then they found, tying it with the sales of the store, that their sales increased by I think 5 or 6%, which was a lot for one of these stores. But then they thought, well, maybe we can make other changes during the day by incorporating that in real time. So that maybe they can adjust help on the fly by moving people from other parts of the store to helping with the dressing room. You really have to think through all the scenarios, and maybe you don't think you need some of it now, but will you need it in 6 months or a year or 2 years? Before AI, you were coming up with reports and dashboards. It was very easy to validate that. Oh, here's the monthly totals. Is this right? And somebody from accounting, whatever, will go like, yeah, that's all right. And there's only one way to look. But now with AI, you just had a blank prompt, and you can start asking a question, and it can give a completely wrong answer because it assumes something. So now you're opening up to a lot more inaccurate answers because of the free form that you can ask an AI. Yeah, you definitely have to make the data AI ready, as I touched on before, and that could be a lot of extra work in massaging the data so it's giving more accurate answers. And so I know a lot of companies who took it as gospel and made a decision and realized that there was the wrong answer in there. As much as you know, there's always a lot more to learn, and it's kind of part of the growth mindset is to realize how much you don't know. And the worst soccer coaches are the ones that thought they know everything because they're not out seeking new information. And it's the same thing as an architect in there. If you think you know everything, you're going to be a terrible architect because there's always more stuff to learn. Don't be afraid of those risks. Sometimes you just got to jump through the door. Find somebody to mentor, and people are very willing to mentor and take those more risks. It's going to be a huge benefit in your career.